But there's a deep-rooted tradition of looking at gambling as sin, rather than disease. And that's part of what we have to change, and that's part of the reason why we're talking this morning about the disease model. Just a little factoid, because this comes up a lot when I talk to folks in Alabama. Gambling is generally, under English common law, held forward through today, gambling is generally illegal unless it's been specifically legalized. So when someone says to me, Keith, can I play poker online? Well, have they specifically legalized online poker in your state? No. Then presumptively it's not. Now it's a little bit like speeding, where, probably a lot of us got down here. I drove on 85 this morning. I probably exceeded the speed limit, a little bit. Did I get caught? No. But, and that's how the law is treated gambling as a vice. So sort of if they go after folks, they go after the operators, not the individual bettors. But you have to ask yourself, the baseline question that I tell people is, if it's not been specifically legalized for a specific group in a specific area, it's probably illegal. Which makes it separate and apart from other commercial activities. Again, the law sees gambling as something that is inherently dangerous to people, and thus is prohibited unless it's permitted. Not the other way around, as most things are. Just again, the legal real quick. It's got to contain three elements: prize, chance, and consideration. That's why. How many of you have played little sweepstakes on the back of a cereal box? And the McDonald's sweepstakes. All right, why is that not gambling? Just think about it. You got to pay, right? You've got a chance to win a prize. It's because if you read the fine print, you can send in a self-addressed stamped envelope and get a free entry. That's the only thing that makes it not an illegal lottery. It's kind of funny. People don't, it's on the back of a cereal box. It can't be that harmful. Well, the only reason it's not a lottery, it actually is a lottery, but you can participate in it for free, so it doesn't fall under the gambling statutes. And then the last quiz I'll give you. Gambling is legal in 48 states. Some form of gambling is legal in 48 states. What are the two without? One's pretty easy.
Alabama.
Yeah. Well, with all due respect to those folks, we certainly think the tribes, at least, can claim that they've got some legality. Utah is one state without any form of legalized gambling by statute, and the other is Hawaii. The only two states in the U.S. without some form of legalized gambling. Because at least, arguably, there's some forms of bingo that are legal here, even if it's kind of metastasized into this, what it is now. Just to give you where we are and where we think we're going. There's been a little bit of a dip. 2009 had a little bit of a dip to 95 billion. It actually declined maybe to 94 billion. It's the first time in the last 20 years we've seen a year-over-year dip in legalized gambling revenue. But at the end by 2018, you're still looking at $160 billion a year in legal gambling revenues alone in the United States. And again, that does not include sports betting outside of Nevada. It does not include internet gambling, these estimates. So who gambles? Like I said, pretty much everybody. I just want to elaborate a little bit because I think this surprises a lot of folks. So you're looking at adults that have ever gambled. 85% have ever gambled. 65% in the past year. Weekly 15%. Pathological 1%. Probably 2%. Kids. By youth, we're talking here 14 to 17 years old. 85%. 70%, that's a little bit higher past year than adults. Kids are a little bit more likely to take risks. My son is 5, and I can see him in a couple years. He's already taking risks like crazy. It's part of being a kid. It's part of adult. It's part of growing up. It's testing those boundaries and limits. However, nowadays they have many more options available than they ever had when I was growing up. The guy that just won the World Series of Poker this year was 22 years old. And when I talk to high school audiences, I say, who knows the last couple winners of the World Series of Poker? How many of you guys have watched poker on ESPN? And how many of you think it's a sport? You'd be stunned at the numbers. Of kids that think, why study 3 hours for my trig final? Because I can spend 3 hours playing poker online. And the more I play, the better I get. The better I get, the more likely I'm to win than lose. And even if I've lost, Roger talked about gambler's fallacy, here's another way to spin it. Even if I lose, I'm that much better. So if I can just stay on and play another hour, I'm going to win it all back. Because it's skill, it's experience. This isn't luck or fate. I know exactly what I'm doing, and now I know more what I'm doing. I'm going to be that much better the next time I log on, so why would I even log off? And plus, the guy that took home the World Series of Poker took home $4.7 million. You know, it's as Amarillo Slim said, it's a hard way to make an easy living. But that's not the way a lot of these kids see it. But when you look at, that's kind of cut off by the bottom of the slide, when you start to look at kids in general gamble, you know, yearly and monthly, about the same as adults. When you start to look at the kids that gamble a lot, their rates are about twice that of adults, including the addiction rate. So you're looking at kids who gamble, at least 11% of kids between the ages of 12 and 14, between the ages of 14 and 17 say they've gambled at least twice for money in the past week, or they've gambled for money at least twice in the past week. Then you look at risk for problem gambling, about 6%, and you're looking at about 2 to 3% with gambling problems. How does this compare to the things that we are a little bit more primed to think about? Well, we'd like to argue that gambling is in fact more prevalent and more problematic than, maybe not more problematic from an addiction standpoint, not necessarily more problematic from a social cost. You know, I think that most people would argue, probably correctly, that the social cost of youth smoking and youth drinking is probably a little bit higher than the social cost of youth gambling. All we're trying to say is, consider this as part of that picture, because we believe that they're doing it more than they are smoking and drinking. In fact, in some ways, in the addictions field, there's a theory, if you will, called transference. You might say that our public health campaigns on tobacco and alcohol have been so successful, they've driven kids from doing that to the next legal fun, addictive thing, which is gambling. It's sort of a paradoxical approach. We talked on the radio show this morning a little bit about the differences in the genders. And this is becoming, if you will, a disease of senior women. That's the fastest growing group of gamblers. And when you look at the Helpline statistics for Alabama that we'll talk about a little bit later, you'll see the majority, the preponderance of our calls are from women, slightly over 45 and up. Gambling participation, however, is quite different. Men are much more likely to gamble. And they're much more likely to gamble on more things, especially more illegal things. When you look at the lottery, it breaks down differently between types of games. Lottery, lottery's pretty egalitarian. Just about everybody's done it or is going to do it. Most of it's pretty small stakes, but lottery participation is so wide and so broad across income classes that there's not a lot of significant differences. Casinos, women are now slightly more likely to play the slots. Men are slightly more likely to play table games. But when you really start to see differences are in things like bingo and electronic gaming machines. And obviously in Alabama, that's kind of the same thing nowadays. Which is a majority of women, vast majority of women. And when you start to look at the types of gambling problems, you can sort of generally break them up into action escape gamblers. You're seeing a lot more female escape gamblers on gaming machines. Of course, women tend to spend less, and they don't do as many games as men do. And when you look at how and why, not how and why they play, how they can play, we've got this crazy quilt of rules that we've evolved. So you've got the 50 states with their gambling laws and regulations, ranging from Utah, which allows nothing, right next door to Nevada, which allows everything except Nevada doesn't allow a lottery. I guess because the state doesn't want any competition. And then you've got the 611 tribes. The vast majority of them have forms of legalized gambling. And then you break it down within the states. If we go, let's see, what's nearby that's got this. There's not too many states down here in the South with multiple forms of gambling, but in like Florida, for example, Florida, the Lottery Commission runs the Florida Lottery, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Racing Commission, which has nothing to do with the tribal gaming commissions. And each of the tribes has their own gaming commission. And then you've got the card rooms and the offshore cruise boats. So there's in Florida alone, there's 6 different regulatory bodies that we've got to deal with. So, I stopped counting at about 2,000 different regulatory bodies that we have to try and kind of harmonize the laws, and how do they address problem gambling? It gets crazy, but you see this a little bit here in Alabama, where bingo rules differ county by county. And some of these county laws have loopholes big enough you can drive a truck through. Because again, our conception of gambling hasn't caught up with our practice. In practice, you can design an electronic bingo machine that looks and feels and plays like a slot machine, but technically meets the requirements for bingo, which were written 30 years ago when all we were concerned about were, how many beans got dropped on, B7. And you're looking at 5 cents a card. This was nothing. But today, as I would argue strongly, gambling has completely changed in our culture and our society, and especially our regulatory structure has not quite come up with it yet. We would argue as well that new forms of gambling tend to be quicker, faster, higher limits, bigger stakes. You might say, quote unquote, more addictive. That's a lay term, but I certainly believe that many of these features are associated with increases in gambling problem severity. So if you can lose $5,000 instead of 5 cents, and if you can lose it every 30 seconds instead of every 3 minutes, obviously that was going to have some impacts on severity of addiction. And not just with the internet, but with advertising of all sorts. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of Alabamans who go to Mississippi, who go to Florida, who travel to Las Vegas, quite frankly. So this stuff all crosses state borders. While we try and think about it within this nice, state border region, obviously gambling advertising, and gamblers themselves, penetrate these borders with ease. I get asked a lot about what is more addictive. Is electronic bingo more addictive than slots, or is video poker worse than blackjack? In some way, it's like asking whether or not vodka is more addictive than gin. Well, you may have preferences. You may have started out drinking gin because that's what your father drank. But now, if you're an alcoholic, you're pretty much going to be drinking anything. Okay, but the distinctions between the games are often overhyped. In the end, it's the gamble. It's that thrill. It's the rush that Roger talked about. It's the tolerance. It's the withdrawal. It's the loss of control. It's the reasons you started gambling in the first place. Now, that's not to say that the forms of gambling don't have differences, important differences when we look at addiction. Again, speed of play. But I can design, and if you guys go to Victoryland, you can see video games are incredibly high speed. They take credits. They're played out on video monitors. They look and feel and play like a slot machine. It's technically bingo. So, technology has allowed us to really even further eliminate some of these differences and distinctions that are still so important in law and regulation. Yes, please.
One of the things I read, though, was that because of the length of time between the wager and the payout, lotteries don't have that immediate feedback hook, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that respect, there is some difference between lotteries versus the immediate payoff.
Sure, yeah, speed of play. Speed of play is important. I can design you a video lottery terminal that'll play you a lottery game every 5 seconds. And traditional lottery, the Irish sweepstakes were once a year. You literally, way back in the 50s and 40s, the Irish sweepstakes up in the Northeast were drawn. You would buy your number and you'd wait once a year to get payoff. Of course, you can do a lot of dreaming in that year. Speed of play is an important characteristic, but it's totally mutable across games. You can now deal blackjack at almost 45 to 50 hands an hour. It can be incredibly fast. So I guess that again, the type of game matters less than how it's played.